because I do like to quote poetry, as most of you know. How gleefully we danced when our love was in fashion, our feet stomping rhythmically on hardwood floors, sweeping away the shadows and opening closet doors, the camouflage that far too long concealed our passion. We were thankful then too, so appreciative of the aid of courts and friends, of supporters and allies, of marchers and bloggers, and stagers of rallies, and of course the media stars who joined the parade. Are we trending now? And what does that mean? How quickly the tide can change direction from fear and shame and circumspection to selfies in places we dared not be seen. The question, did you and your friend get gay married? Well, I was gay, he was gay, and yes, we were wed. And nothing all that gay was done or said. Oh, and over the threshold, no one got carried. How is it that from where we started, we ended up here? An unlikely, if not unimaginable place. Before families were modern, before Will had grace. So now we gaily sing and dance and even cheer. It was such an exciting time for creative writing. Commentaries in motion like tops on steroids. Pundits embracing with gusto what logic avoids. Imagined wars and battles no one was fighting. Hurricanes reportedly were growing more severe. The science crowd ascribes it to the myth of climate change. But we know this was retribution that only God could arrange. He was punishing Orlando for holding gay days there. So here we stand like tongue-tied winners on Oscar night. So many to include and oh, so many to thank. Friends of different stripes and judges of every rank. And polls that called it wrong until they called it right. I'd like to thank the Massachusetts State Courts, the brilliant attorneys who argued the case, the financial backers from each widespread place, and of course the bold men and women who came out in sports. Let's thank Ellen and Rosie and Ricky and more, and the pioneer activists who first lit the charge with the drag queens strutting in size extra large. We came here on the backs of our heroes of yore. So thanks to those people with sense now to say, you gay men and lesbians are all people too, just as good and bad and wondrous as any of you, and not as slow as some to see it that way. So let's be happy for so many seeing the light, that hearts, minds, and attitudes are able to change. And yet I'm finding it something strange when we find it remarkable to do what is right. I was looking through the Bible and discovered, not for the first time, that there's some disturbing things there. And usually you look for disturbing in the Old Testament, but I found something a little disturbing in the New Testament. It was Jesus telling a story. It was one of his parables. And the servant had done what he was supposed to do. And the master said, "You are a worthless servant. You have only done your duty." And that disturbed me because I think in our mindset, we would at least say, "Good job." We might even say, "Thank you." But the point that Jesus was making was not that the servant was worthless, but that what he did was not above and beyond. And as I reflected on marriage equality, it occurred to me that we give people a lot of credit for doing their duty, for doing what is right. And we say, "Wow, kudos to Maryland, because they're marrying people of the same sex, and nobody else is. And isn't it wonderful that their people voted for it? It wasn't just something that the courts made them do." And yes, we are grateful and ought to be. But it is not heroic to do the right thing, particularly when the right thing doesn't cost you anything. And that's where the problem has been for a very long time. The sense that giving rights to one person must necessarily take them away from someone else. That it's a zero-sum game. There's a winner and there's a loser. But that has never been the case. And the whole process has been mired in mythology and worse, mired in deception. A little over a year ago, I had the great honor of presiding at a ring blessing and celebration of the wedding, marriage, and life commitment of two former members of Dignity Nova, Joe McLean and Bill Nichols. And as I was preparing for that ceremony, I listened to a song by America. The song was Tin Man. And the line that struck me was, "Oz never did give nothing to the Tin Man that he didn't already have." And people in Maryland were rejoicing and falling over themselves with gratitude because Maryland had given them the right to be married. And my response was, Oz never did give nothing to the Tin Man that he didn't already have. Within a month, the Supreme Court is going to make a decision. They're going to make a ruling, and the big money in Vegas is saying that they're going to make marriage equality the law of the land. There is still that slim possibility that they will frustrate the odds makers. And we will be dejected and depressed if that happens. And I personally will be embarrassed because I've been saying for a very long time that I have confidence in the court. And I really don't ever want to have to say I have no confidence in the court. And no, it doesn't mean I'll say I was wrong. But whatever happens, we need to be secure in one belief, one conviction, and that is what we are asking for is legal recognition of what exists. We are not asking the court to create anything. We did not ask legislatures to create anything. We did not ask other courts to create anything. We simply asked that they recognize what we already knew. And what we already knew was this: that gay men and lesbians are all people too. As bad and as good and as wondrous as any of you. To recognize that that ability, that desire, that need to love and be loved does not come from any human being. We are endowed with that by our Creator. And if we're not sure about that, we can go back to Genesis, where God recognized himself. It's not good for you guys to be alone. You should have each other and others. And our ability, our capacity, and our desire and need for love is a gift that we've received from God. Courts, legislatures, popular votes can neither add nor subtract to it. The best they can do is open their eyes and see it. And this year will most likely go down in history as the year of marriage equality. And it is what I would call the year of marriage recognition. A year when more people could see than were blind. We have some opposition, of course, and we as gay Catholics are used to it. We're kind of in the middle of the church doesn't want this to happen because, and here's where the arguments fall apart. They all begin with, this is the way that marriage has always been. And then they go on to explain, it has always been a commitment between one man and one woman. It's actually a fairly modern invention. Most marriages in the beginning of civilization were about holding on to the property. They were about political connections, business connections, safety connections. They were not arranged by two people who ran in slow motion through a field of wildflowers. They were arranged by parents who sat down with their brothers and cousins and every other relative who was available and said, what would be the best match for my son or my daughter? And then they worked it out. It was also not always one man and one woman. Frequently, it was one man and as many women as he could afford, which was never good for the women, because if you happened to have a husband who could afford one wife but thought he could afford 4, nobody was getting overfed. The idea that something is true because it has always existed should have been shot down pretty forcefully when we passed the 13th Amendment. Because it was always true that some people were slaves and other people were masters. That doesn't make it right. That just makes it old. When Virginia refused to recognize the marriage of a white man and a black woman, they said, it's always been this way. There has always been a separation of the races. And we all knew that wasn't true. But they took that argument to court. Fortunately, that argument had run out of gas. But they're still using that same argument today. It's always been. Well, always been does not make it right. Before Jonas Salk and later Sabin, there always was polio. Now, what were we supposed to do? Oh yeah, we've always had it. It's supposed to be. Don't worry about it. No, deal with it. And that's where we are now. I continue to be hopeful and fairly confident that at the end of June, we're going to say, this is the law of the land, marriage equality. I'm prepared to continue living if it isn't, but I really hope I don't have to deal with that. But this is the reality in which we live. You hear this expression, the new normal. And it's usually said disparagingly, oh yeah, now we have this, that's the new normal, as if the new normal is a terrible thing. Well, this is going to be not the new normal, simply the new reality. And reality is not good or bad, it just is. It's how we handle it that is either good or bad. We as a community celebrate what has been done, and we anticipate what still is to be done. And regardless of those circumstances outside our control, the one thing we do control is our love, care, and concern for one another. And that's what we celebrate tonight, 23 years of it. And look forward to another 25. God bless you all, and have a great evening.